Hi, the name of this Blender video tutorial is Relationship Constraints, ChildOf. Blender has many relationship constraints. One of these is called the ChildOf constraint. The ChildOf constraint is quite similar to Blender's parenting function, however it offers a number of different functions not available with simple parenting. To demonstrate the ChildOf constraint, I placed in my Blender scene a UV sphere-like object named Blue Sphere, and a red cone object named Cone1. I will select the sphere object and go to the Constraints editor and add a ChildOf constraint. In the target box, I'll select the Cone1 object. Note that upon applying the ChildOf constraint, the sphere object occupies the same x, y, and z location as the cone object's origin. It also possesses the same x, y, and z scale and x, y, and z rotation as the cone object. This may or may not be the desired result. To counter this effect, I will click on the Set Inverse button, located in the ChildOf constraint panel. This will set the sphere object's x, y, and z location, rotation, and scale back to its original state. Once I have selected Set Inverse, the sphere object acts like a regular child of the cone object. Moving the cone moves the sphere. Rotating the cone rotates the sphere. Scaling the cone scales the sphere. However, the ChildOf panel contains a number of checkboxes that will limit the parent effect. For instance, I will uncheck all of the rotation and scale checkboxes. And again, click on Set Inverse button. Now the cone parent will only control the x, y, and z location of the sphere. I will uncheck the x and y location checkboxes and click the Set Inverse button again. Now the cone parent will only control the z location of the sphere. Like all child objects, I can move, rotate, or scale the child without affecting the parent. I have another hidden cone object in the scene, and I will unhide it, named Cone2. Unlike normal child-parent relationships, the Child2 constraint allows an object to be a child of multiple parent objects. I will select the sphere object and add another ChildOf constraint. In the target box, I'll select the Cone2 object. I will uncheck all of the constraint checkboxes except the X location constraint box. I'll then click on the Set Inverse button. The sphere now has two parent objects. Cone1 controls the z location of the sphere, and Cone2 controls the x location of the sphere. Another feature of the Child2 constraint is the influence controller. The influence controller controls the amount of transform effect it has on the child object. For instance, I will set the z-parent influence to 0.5, and I'll set the x-parent influence to 0.25. Now the Cone1 parent must move twice the distance in the z direction to influence the same z-child movement that it would have with an influence level of 1. The Cone2 parent must move 4 times the distance in the x direction to influence the same x-child movement that it would have with an influence level of 1. The variable influence controller also means that a parent's transformation influence can be turned on or off completely at any point in an animation. This is not quite as handy as it might originally be expected. Once the influence for a particular parent is set to 0, the child reverts to its original location, rotation, and scale transform unless the Set Inverse button is activated. Therefore, animating the influence controller requires a bit of planning. To demonstrate this type of influence controller animation, I've set up 3 objects on layer number 2. Here I have a red cone, a blue sphere, and a yellow cube object. The idea for this animation is to have the red cone move down along the z-axis, pick up, so to speak, the blue sphere, and then move up along the z-axis, and then move across the x-axis, and then move down the z-axis, in effect placing the blue sphere in the yellow box. The red cone, then empty of the blue sphere, moves back up along the z-axis, and the yellow cube moves off to the right, in effect carrying the blue sphere off. Now I've set the animation length to 90 frames. I'll then select the blue sphere and add a ChildOf constraint. I'll select the red cone as the target object. I will then uncheck all of the scale and rotation constraints and uncheck the Y location constraint. I will then click the Set Inverse button, which will set the blue sphere back to its original position. The red cone object will now control the X and the Z location of the blue sphere. I'll then set the influence controller to 0. I'll then add another ChildOf constraint to the blue sphere object. I'll select the yellow cube as the target object. I will uncheck all of the scale and rotation checkboxes, and I'll uncheck the Y and Z location constraints. In this case, however, I will not press the Set Inverse button. I will set the influence controller to 0, which now moves the blue sphere back to its original position. The yellow cube will control the X location of the blue sphere. In this sense, the X location of the blue sphere is controlled by both the red cone and the yellow cube. When the red cone influence is at full, or at a level of 1, and the yellow cube influence is at 0, the blue sphere is in its original position. When the red cone influence is at 0, and the yellow cube influence is at 1, the blue sphere is located in the yellow cube. I'll turn off the influence for both parent objects. I'll then go to frame number 1 and select the red cone and press the I key and insert a location keyframe on frame number 1. I'll select the yellow cube and insert a location keyframe on frame number 1 as well. I'll select the blue sphere, and in the top child panel, I'll insert an influence keyframe by right-clicking in the influence box on frame number 1. This is the influence slider for the red cone parent. In the bottom ChildOf panel, I will also insert an influence keyframe by right-clicking in the influence box on frame number 1. This is the influence slider for the yellow cube parent. I will then go to frame number 15. Here I will move the red cone down along the z-axis until it penetrates the blue cone object. I will add a location keyframe here for the red cone on frame number 15. I will also add a keyframe for the influence controller for the red cone, still at 0 influence, on frame number 15. I'll then go to frame 16. Here I will move the top influence slider for the red cone parent to full, and I'll click Set Inverse. I'll then add a keyframe for this influence controller on frame 16. The reason for these 2 keyframes is to bracket the influence effect so that it is completely at 0 for the first 15 frames and then jumps full on frame number 16. This negates any animation curve. I'll then go to frame number 30. I'll then move the red cone up along the z-axis, and the blue sphere, now fully influenced as a child, moves along with it. I'll add a location keyframe for the red cone at frame number 30. I'll then go to frame 45. I'll move the red cone to the right along the x-axis, and then add a location keyframe. I'll then go to frame number 60. I'll move the red cone down along the z-axis, placing the blue sphere in the yellow box. I'll add a location keyframe to the red cone on frame number 60. I'll select the blue sphere and also add an influence controller keyframe for frame 60. This is the other part of the keyframe bracket. The influence is at 0 from frame 1 to 15 and full from frame 16 to 60. I'll also add an influence keyframe for the bottom influence slider, the one controlled by the yellow cube, still at 0 influence, and this will begin the bracketing for the second influence slider. I'll then go to frame 61. I'll reduce the top influence slider to 0, removing the influence of the red cone parent, and move the lower influence slider to full, replacing the influence with the yellow cube influence. I'll add keyframes to both influence sliders. I'll then go to frame number 75. I'll move the red cone up along the z-axis and add a location keyframe. I'll also add a location keyframe to the yellow cube. I'll then go to frame number 90. I'll move the yellow cube to the right along the x-axis. Since the blue sphere is now influenced fully by the yellow cube parent, it follows along with the yellow cube. I'll then add a location keyframe for the yellow cube on frame 90. I'll go back to frame number 1, and I'll play the animation. The red cone moves down along the z-axis, picks up the blue sphere, moves back up along the z-axis, and then moves right along the x-axis. Then down along the z-axis, and then deposits the blue sphere in the yellow cube, and it moves back up along the z-axis. The yellow cube then carries off the blue sphere along the x-axis.